And so again, this session is titled How to Search for the Weak Link in Your Usage. And we're really, really glad to have you here today. My name is Chris Hara, and I'm the program manager for the Verizon Innovative Learning program here at the Mind Research Institute. And I'll be here monitoring the chat, answering any technical questions, and we will be recording, as I mentioned. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce you to our Chief Data Science Officer, Andrew Golson, who's going to kick it off again with how to identify the weak link in your usage.
Always with the mute. Thank you very much, Chris, and welcome everybody. Get started in a second. I just want to say that I'm happy to report that instead of, I have so much stuff and I'm going to go really fast. I have kind of a limited amount of stuff and I'm going to go at a pretty measured pace. Still hope that time at the end for some real district or school or classroom use case data type of questions. Throw me your toughest knuckleball, and at worst, we'll take it offline and I'll get you some information. So with that said, hopefully my sharing of my app works. Chris, if you can confirm that this is video. Yep, awesome. Okay, so there we go. That's my usual facial expression, pondering. So you can feel free also to send me an email now or later at that acolson@mindresearch.org email address. I don't look at Twitter much, but that's my links on LinkedIn also. And since I'm the data guy at Mind, I'm going to be talking to you about data. And since this is a for administrators session, that's perfect because that's the kind of school building district level type of usage information that I want to share with you all. Some of it is pretty recent findings from the last year. And there's a few pieces of what we like to call mind your schema, like how do you understand the conceptual framework such that Mind and STMath can do what it's designed to do. So I've got a few pieces for that at the end. And there's also some actions for you potentially to take afterwards to get more information. So let me begin hopefully some illumination. So to talk about usage, yeah, it's nice that Mind has targets for STMath, and there's wonderful support people who are encouraging usage. But well, what is this usage, this puzzles or whatever? What does it get you anyhow? So I want to unpack this schema, this conceptual framework of usage, and we've written and produced a little two-side infographic about how do you get from minutes to school math performance growth. We call that our theory of change. The link below, and Chris, if you can post that, that'd be awesome in the chat. The link below is to actually a podcast where I unpack that, but you can also get directly from that link to the two-pager. So anyhow, the schema is basically you provide minutes, the students turn that into puzzles. Puzzles are learning objectives. Learning objectives cover standards, and then covering standards is what gets you the scale score points. So I just want to unpack those three. And by the way, since I don't have way more material than we have time for, I don't think, feel free to ask real-time questions, or Chris, you can hold things up until the end as well. But Chris, if you interrupt me with a question, that's great. So unpacking these things. First is minutes get you puzzles, and you might not exactly take that for granted necessarily. Like, what if there's some students who kind of refuse to really engage or take their focus off a lot or get stuck for a super long time? And so I wondered those things as well. And one of the main pictures that I have in my mind. Every time I think about minutes and how does that turn into puzzles, which is kind of the same thing as progress, is this, we call it a hair chart. This chart in the upper right that I first saw in 2017. And each one of those lines is a student's progression through STMath. You can't see the x-axis, but it's minutes. And every time they do a session, we put another point of how many minutes and how much progress, and connected all those points together, and that created a student trajectory. And the first kind of takeaway from this is that as you got more and more minutes, students made more and more progress. So signs of students kind of getting to a certain point and disengaging. In fact, they adopt a certain steady pace, which is on the chart, kind of the whatever slope the student's on progress per hour or whatever, they kind of stay throughout the whole school year and throughout the content on a similar pace. This is a self-paced mastery progression program. So to progress, you need to and solve all the puzzles in the level, right? And some students, if they don't pass a level, or any student who doesn't pass a level, then they replay the level, which takes more time, right? So you can see theoretically that higher performing students are going to, I'm on the bullets on the left now, higher performing students will less puzzles. And I just got an internet connection problem. So Chris, let me know if my audio gets wonky or anything. Sorry about that. Okay, so we'll fail less puzzles. They'll have less replay, and they'll go faster, basically, faster puzzles per minute for the higher performing students. And then mid-performing students will go at their steady self-pace, and lower performing at their steady self-pace. And so you can see on this hair chart, the green, light green, blue, and red lines are for 4 different state standardized math test proficiency levels. And you can see empirically that indeed this is the case. You've got the speedboat kids, they're encoded in green, and then the kids who are working their way through more steadily with more level fails, takes more time, and potentially with more learning as well. So minutes do get you puzzles, and I didn't necessarily take that for granted until I saw this kind of information. It's real interesting to me that students adopt a pace and kind of stick to that pace through the year. So that's first part. Second is a lot simpler, just a reminder that every time they pass and collect puzzles, they're passing a level, and levels add up to games, and games add up to learning objectives. So you just keep collecting those puzzles, and eventually you've completed a whole learning objective. And the objectives, of course, they have objective names, but of course, they're also aligned to standards. So important to think that as you're collecting puzzles, you're not just getting, I used to call it the homogeneous smush of good penguin content, but in fact, they're different learning objectives, and you're kind of collecting that STMath experience in more just a snippet out of a bunch of grade 4, and you see at the bottom from grade 5 learning objectives and the line standards. So that one's not too high degree of difficulty, but important puzzles are getting you more and more standards. And then as you cover more and more standards, and again, this is the theory of change infographic, but as you cover more and more standards, you have to play a drill, you had to solve puzzles and get all the puzzles in the level correctly, even if it took you more tries. And those puzzles and that level, eventually that learning objective is certain state math test or state standards. And then later you come upon this, in spring, this summative state test that has a whole bunch of test items, and the test items themselves are aligned to state standards. And the theory of change is that if you've experienced and beaten visual games on that standard in STMath, then the STMath has that opportunity to help you to answer that summative test item more likely correctly, right? So piling up more and more standards, a way of saying it is, can help you on more and more of the test items on the state summative test. And I'll show you some information later. Well, actually, I have a little bit of it right here about how we check that. So how can we say that all you need to do is pass these puzzles and, statistically and on average, it's not every single student, exact predictions and stuff like that, but statistically and on average, more puzzles means more scale score points growth that year. Well, first off, theoretically, first bullet is that our STMath approach with the non-language based, the mastery progression, the instructor design, this productive challenge, all is pretty different from conventional instruction, and even I'd say quite different from anything else that's out there, in that it's the math word is orthogonal. It's like on a different plane from conventional instruction students who haven't the ST approach haven't seen before. And that's a way that it can add value to all student subgroups. If it didn't, maybe there'd be some student subgroups who got puzzles, got standards, and it didn't show that it helped them on the state math test because they kind of, didn't need what the puzzles were giving them. But this is orthogonal to conventional instruction, so it can deliver value add to all student subgroups, and also because it's different on all different math. It's not like we see, some students benefit on, I don't know, the number sense stuff, and then not so much on the algebra and it's different enough that it can benefit all students on all math. And one way we can see this is we can do impact studies on specific subgroups and see that there's equitable impact for English learners, or I think one of the new terms is emerging bilinguals, for SPED, and even, and this is kind of a special case, but it kind of makes the point, even for when a state reports out for the gifted and talented subgroup only, who probably would test out of any kind of quote intervention or supplementation, and who probably, and we can see it in the numbers, are getting the right answer procedurally to math questions. And yet this is different enough and brings all students to productive struggle that we see a similar effect size impact. In case of gifted and talented, it's things like going from 91% meeting standards to 98% meeting standards. So the game isn't all about GT, but that kind of makes this point that there's something in the STMath approach for all students on all the math that makes a difference. And the last part on this slide is we actually can quantify what's a puzzle worth. So we do assessment studies at district request at the individual student level, and we have a model, which I won't go into, a 4-variable model in the upper right, where we can compare students who did more, a medium amount, or less of STMath content, control for lots of other stuff, and see how much did that, going from low to medium amount or medium to high amount of STMath, how much difference did that make literally in scale score points. And down below is from, this happens to be from Texas. So we did a study, we do one for every grade level. So in this particular study for 4th grade student, every 10% of STMath progress, or roughly speaking, every 300 puzzles, earned them 14 plus or minus star scale score points. And I've done many, many dozens of these studies for districts now. It's very robust. It's similar findings across different districts. It's also similarly impacting if we just look at a certain subgroup. So I'm very confident to own this schema of get more puzzles, get more scale score points. And if we've done a study on your state assessment, then like this Texas one, and because these are repeatable, we've done many Texas ones, we can relay that to you about how many scale score points per 100 puzzles or whatever is it on your assessment, or even on third-party assessments like NWA? So finally, and I know I'm kind of pointing to a door that will make a bunch of new projects show up, but that's fine. And you're here for this special learning symposium. So we also could take, if you'd like to, at your district or even a single school with district authorization, we can calibrate what's this number of scale score points per puzzles for your situation. We just need 2 test administrations. It could even be like a winter to spring type of thing on third party. So if minutes get you that stuff, and if usage is therefore tied to something that we're after, and if it's about how many cumulative minutes do you get, and here's the insights for today's talk, this is the kind of new stuff, then how does a student, or how do you as the coach, if you will, or the manager of the student, how do you get to a total amount of cumulative minutes that get you the scale score points through that process, etc.? Well, you just got to log in during a week and you got to play minutes, right? And we can exhort, we want to get to X thousand, 1,000 minutes or 2,000, whatever it might be. But I want to give you some more schema, some more insight in how to pull apart the components that add up to minutes, and then insights into how does that look out there, and ultimately reports that you can access to help you manage and improve if there's gaps. So and these aren't links. I'm just big on colors and underlining, and so there's 2 new metrics that are available. They're available. I'll tell you more about how they're available. They're kind of new. One of them is an attendance metric. And what this is at an individual student basis, however many weeks the student has logged in, and students do skip weeks. So this is part of the big story here. So they logged in that week, tally up how many weeks they've logged in, and divide by the total number of weeks so far this year. So when you're like 10 weeks in, if the student has logged in 5 weeks, that would be a 50% attendance metric. It would also mean that they've skipped 5 weeks. The minutes metric, this one is not just total minutes over how many weeks this school year, like in that case I just mentioned, that we wouldn't take the total minutes for that student and divide by 10 weeks. If they only logged in for 5 weeks, we would take the total amount of minutes that they've logged and divide it by 5, by the 5 logged in weeks, because we want to know not a bunch of zeros in an average in this example again, 5 zeros and then 5, 50 to 60s and then average it all together and say, it's a 25. We want to go, they logged in 5 of the 10 weeks, but when they did log in, here's how many minutes they averaged for those 5 weeks. So hope that makes sense. And then the arithmetic, I should have said I'm going to go hopefully slow, but also going to use some math thinking here and some arithmetic. So this arithmetic is the total year-to-date minutes then with these new blue and purple underlined metrics. Is you take the average minutes per week, you multiply that by the percent weekly attendance times the number of attendable weeks. So those bottom 2 add up to how many weeks did they log in, and then the next one up, the average minutes per week, is how many minutes per week times weeks they logged into. So hopefully that makes sense. It's unpacking just this 1 minutes number into components. And let's take a look at what sort of insights we might see from that. And the most striking one, I'm skipping through a lot of exploration here to give you the nuggets that showed up. And to me, one of the most striking ones is about how does one manage for high fidelity or desired amount of usage at scale. So this is like across a whole district. And amazingly enough, I found that it makes a big difference which district you're in. This is 10 sample districts that aren't named, but they're representative of large, small, old, senior with ST Math, brand new, known to have high functioning implementation, or known to not have as good. So there are all these different types of districts. And this chart here, it's in data land, this is called the density plot. It's kind of like a histogram, but smoothed out. So each one of those lines is a district, and then the area underneath the line shows how many students, and where the peaks are shows where the bulk of their students are. And so you can see, if you look at it, that peak on the left with the highest spot for this blue colored curve, that means lots of students. The mode, if you will, the most students is at real low attendance, but there's some at higher attendance. And then on the flip side, you see like this purple and pink and rosy pink, whatever that is, and green. My wife says I can't tell the difference too good. But anyway, all of these off at the right are most of the students not skipping weeks, basically, with pretty routine attendance. So I'm going to give these some simple terms of the district's bulk of the students can be low, like that blue one, or some of the others have kind of a mode or a peak at low percent attendance, or high, like those ones off to the right. Or there's some that are just kind of all over, and they've got some students at low and middle and high attendance, and kind of in between. But it's really striking that this is districts with 10 to 50 schools, and of course hundreds and hundreds of teachers in classrooms, and yet it makes a big difference which of these kinds of districts the students find themselves in, and kind of insights as to why would that be. We'll leave for Q&A later, or it's like speculation, but I was kind of amazed at this night and day difference depending on district. And this also gives you a sense of, and there's some challenges where we'd like to be like the high ones, and there's examples of really good percent attendance. So what if we imagine that we can take one of the lower situations, or even an all over situation, and make look more like one of those higher situations where most of the students are piled up at that not skipping weeks, at that regular attendance. And so the number I'm using is students who are only skipping 15% or less of the weeks that they could attend, or put it another way, with 85% or better attendance. So what would that do if we were to get kiddos who are skipping more than 15% of their weeks, and just in whatever way get them to show up most every week regularly, 85% or more of the weeks? So without any kind of attendance filter, and you saw there's the low and the all over the map kind of districts, and then the year-to-date cumulative minutes, when you look at all of those districts, there's many students who are skipping a lot. And by the way, the skipping is more after after COVID hit and all of that. But in any case, so we see some students at this range that we would like to see to get the most scale score points as we can in minutes and in puzzles, but a lot of students just not getting the minutes in. That's with no floor and weekly attendance. Now, if we filter and we say, let's just look at students who got 85% or more of the weeks attended, and not even with any filter on how many minutes they spent that week, just did they come in on the reg, and the distribution of minutes changes to this one on the lower right, with a peak at around 2,000 minutes, and kind of going from lot on the left, lot of students missing out on a lot of scale score points growth, to on the right, the bulk of students getting through lots of learning objectives and math standards and earning the scale score points in a much more healthy amount than on the left. So that's just with the weekly attendance. And there's another finding that was a surprise to me, but this was a good surprise, and I call it the good kind of double whammy. Oftentimes whammies are negative, but this is the positive bubble whammy. And it's shown with this bubble chart right here. And this chart, and I hope you knew that you were going to be asked to look at and interpret charts when you signed in for this presentation. This one is across the bottom axis. We took students and binned them by their percent attendance. So this, on the far right, this bubble and the size of the bubble represents how many students are in that bin. So this one on the far right, it's a little tough to read, but that's the 95 to 100% attendance. And it even goes on beyond that, because there's some kids who attend in unattendable weeks like winter break, and we don't count that as attendable. But anyhow, so this is 95 to 100% attendance, and in the middle we might have to say this bubble is 45 to 50% attendance. So we've binned all the kiddos by what, and this was a full school year, what attendance bin did they have for that, or fall into for that school year, and then the size of the bubble is how many students, and then we averaged their minutes per week attended. That's the y-axis. And so the slope is the thing that pops out here, which is attending weeks more regularly goes along with, not only did you get more weeks to accumulate minutes, but every one of those more weeks, you actually, and the students, I mean, actually average more minutes during the week. And that's how, when you're looking at the higher percent attendance, you're also getting, like, look at these numbers here, the average for the 95 to 100% attendance bin, that's real high. But they were averaging for all those weeks, most of the weeks of the school year, they were averaging over 80 minutes per week. Again, we could hypothesize about what is it about students where when they go more regularly, they end up being logged in for more time. But this is a very robust effect, and later you're going to find out how you could look at this for your situation. And I want to buy at least the first person who doesn't find this, I want to buy you a lunch and really dive into your situation, because I've seen these over and over again, and it's a super robust effect. And I hope you can see that it's kind of a hopeful double whammy for these on the low or the all over situations, to be able to look at just one thing and as straightforward as regular weekly attendance and see how much of a difference that can make on minutes per week. And then also kind of back to this on, and of course, you get, and we talked the first few slides about how that was important for math learning, right? So this is a pretty high fidelity district. I'm showing you one more of these bubble charts, same thing, but this is at one of the low districts. And you can see that it was low because look at the size of these bubbles. Tragically, the biggest bubble is at kind of one and done, where they logged in once and then the rest of the year they didn't log in, probably because that's what has to happen to get you into this only 5% or less attendance. So this is a low fidelity, one of those lower districts pushed off to the left, lots of kids at low attendance. And you can see that with the size of the bubble, but you can still see this almost same kind of slope up here, that their 95 to 100% kiddos were over 80 minutes, and so were their 90 to 95% kiddos. So I want to say, and this is now kind of over interpretation maybe, or not a kind of science finding, but I want to say that this slope thing is about the one-to-one with the kids and the video game. And whether or not they happen to find themselves into high performing or high fidelity or middle or low district, when they're regular, then they spend more minutes on the program. So that's a good kind of double whammy. And you can see there's a lot of room to improve in many cases, just regular attendance. So last part of this, hopefully pretty slow and understandable, therefore, presentation is, you might be asking, how can I get my hands on this type of info for my kiddos? And I think I alluded to, we have reports available. They're not at this time. So here we are, next level learning is they're going to make their way into the console in some manner, but for now, how you get it is we have reports. I'm going to show you them, and you can talk to your education or customer success manager to get a report for yourself. They have a way to get that internal to Mind and get that to you. And the reports actually come out at different levels. So there's everything from district level information, what was our average district attendance, to just one school at a time level. There's breakouts, which I'll show you, of let's compare from grade to grade. What did K, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, et cetera, look like? And at the school level, there's even being able to look from classroom to classroom, like, do I have some exemplar classroom, and maybe some of the other classrooms with room to improvement could, get some tips from an exemplar classroom. Also, for the data geeks among you, we have numbers, not just reports and charts. So there's tables or spreadsheets that can be gotten about all this stuff. So let me show you some reports, and then again, I'm hoping that you might have some use cases, questions at the end of this. I think we're going to be okay on time for questions, right, Chris? So if I finish pretty soon. So please be thinking of those questions, and let me show you some of the reports, the way we are visualizing it. So this is one of our usage insight reports. They typically have multiple charts, so I'm just showing you charts one at a time. We'll have a district level insight report, a school level insight report, etc. This is a minutes per week chart, and we color coded it so that green was greater than 60 minutes a week averaging, and red was less than 30 minutes a week averaging. And this is a pretty high performing school district. Small, each row is a school here, and the x-axis is what percent of the users in that school fell into the green or the blue or the red, by this time year to date. This again happened to be the whole 21-22 school year. And you probably can't see them, but we put little numbers into each of the color segments. So this was like, at this highest performing school, we had 194 students in the green. That means averaging more than 60 minutes. And that was approximately 60% of the total number of students at that school. That's how you read these things. And the rest are going to be similar. So there's a minutes per week chart, and then there's a percent week attendance chart. Not as much green on this one, different district, but you can still see like each row is a school still, and you can still see that at the top, there's a highest performing or highest fidelity, if you will, school in a district. So you can get some insight and comparison, and again, the x-axis is the percent of users at the school. So how did it stack up? All the schools get the same width of bar. And in this case, green was that same 85% or more of students attending. Red was less than 15%. And I got a request from our wonderful education success crew. Hey, could we have a little more insight into that blue? Because there's a heck of a lot of blue. So we're going to have, I think it's at least 4 bins, if not 5, depending, for the school year 22-23 report. So you can get some more gradation than just less than 15%. I mentioned that these also can break out, so you could look for gaps or exemplars by grade level. And so here's just an example within one of these reports of looking at percent weeks attended by grade level. Not a great amount of difference in this case. This is a very high fidelity kind of user. But again, you could see if one of your grade levels, maybe you've got some middle school grades, and you can compare to the early elementary grades or whatever, see how things are going on minutes, on attendance. And there's even a breakout on the school level to look at the teachers and classrooms within the school and see again if there's exemplars to learn from, etc. Okay, so that's the usage insight reports. Of course, we also have that bubble chart, the double whammy chart, and this is for folks who want a little more information than just a bubble. This is what's called a box plot, and so most of the students are between. Most of the students are fall into this. Now it's a spread, not just a dot at a certain average. The average is the horizontal line, and you can kind of, once you get used to reading these, you can see the spread of students where most of them are in the rectangle. The highest and lowest are this whiskers part here. But we can see for the 85 to 90% attendance, where that mean was around 80 minutes, we can see that the vast majority of them were well above 60 minutes. Okay, so it's not the case that we're a bunch of kids at 200 and a bunch of kids at 30 and it averaged 80. They're all kind of bulked around 80 plus or minus. That's what this kind of chart also shows you. So if you have somebody who's a little more data skeptical, you can click an option and get this kind of chart as well. And of course, it shows that slope upwards. Also, kinds of reports we have, you may have seen this one more, and you might have seen some of the others because they got released last school year. But we also have impact reports on our STMath internal assessments. So this is what we call our quiz growth report, and its design is objectives centric. We're going to look at specific objectives for all the kids who went through that objective. In this case, for multiplication concepts in third grade, that was 236,948 kids. The average pre-quiz for it was 42%, average post-quiz was 63% at 0.82 effect size. Here, these are probably common core. Here are the standards that it covered. So, of course, we also have this type of report. And then finally, besides ask your education or customer success manager about getting these, well, what if you'd like some of them on a regular basis? And that's possible too. We call them Cron Jobs for chronology jobs that we run. And we have a way to securely transfer, which we need to do if there's going to be any student level information, of course, and there are things, one row per student, and what was that individual student's percent attendance so far this year, that kind of thing. So we have a secure transfer. It is restricted to your email address only. Some of you may have been using this tool. It's called Send Safely. We can send the tables and spreadsheets, AKA spreadsheets, I should say. There's ways to select date ranges. And when you're in a consultation with your education or customer success manager about some educational need, some purpose, some goal that you have for the information, we can consult on that, what's the right kind of spreadsheet, or even make a custom one for you that's got a custom date range. Oftentimes I'll see stuff like, we had a kind of a contest going about who gets puzzles during winter break, and it was these date ranges or something like that. So we can manage that type of support of information for you as well. We can put things on a regular schedule. We can even, beyond the tables and spreadsheets, we can even put reports on a regular schedule. A lot of times they don't change much very frequently, so I wouldn't recommend making that really quick. But we set these things up in the computer, and then they run on a weekend night kind of basis and make information available to you. So I hope through this there were a few pieces of new, or at least reinforcing, again, what we call the schema about why is usage important, what are the things that need to happen to build it up, why is Andrew so hot on percent attendance, could be a weak link, and how can I find out more about how strong is that link in my situation. And don't hesitate to email me also, and for probably the third time, you can talk to your wonderful education or customer success manager.
So thank you again, Andrew, and thank you everyone for joining us today.